What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the Santa Clauses. Returning to play Santa Claus and Scott Calvin, you have Tim Allen alongside his Mrs. Claus, Elizabeth Mitchell, and some new faces here like Austin Kane, Elizabeth Allen Dick, Matilda Lawler, Devin Bright, Cal Penn, Rupali Red, and many, many more. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to my review for the Santa Clauses, the latest Disney Plus series to wrap up. It wrapped up as of filming this yesterday, and I wasn't necessarily in a rush to do this video, but I still wanted to talk about it. I haven't covered the Santa Claus films here starring Tim Allen just yet, but they're definitely some of my favorite Christmas movies that I grew up watching. Maybe not so much the third one, but I still enjoy it. I have like a guilty pleasure place in my heart for it, and specifically those first two, I thought they were great films growing up as a kid. You know, they're goofy, they're not perfect, but they're good family films that I think definitely have a lot of messages for both adults and kids. So when I found out there was going to be a follow-up to those original three films starring Tim Allen once again as Santa Claus along with other returning characters, I was all in. But one of the things that I actually just found out in writing down my notes for this and looking at IMDb that is part of my problem most definitely with this show is that there are 13 credited writers across 7 episodes of the show. Yeah, I'll go ahead and start this off by saying I unfortunately was not a huge fan of this show. I was just finding it to be a dud week to week, and outside of small moments that were funny or things that kind of made me feel nostalgic for the previous films, I often found myself really bored with this series and just disconnected with the characters and the humor here. Now, naturally, you're probably thinking, well, Anthony, this is something that's far more for a younger audience. This is something that's for kids. And you're not necessarily wrong. This is for sure for kids, but as somebody who's always going back and revisiting older family films, things for kids, I literally just uploaded a review a few days ago for The Land Before Time 4, and somebody who's consistently keeping up with modern day family films as well, I feel like I'm still pretty integrated in that world. There's definitely a big kid inside of me, so I do like content that tends to be geared towards kids just as much as I did when I was a kid. But yeah, I just found that this show for me was just missing the mark. There was a charm to those original 3 films that Tim Allen played Santa Claus in that just is just not present here in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, you know, without a doubt, this is a show that I think had a lot of potential when I look at the entire story that played out across these 7 episodes and I think about them on paper. I do understand how this maybe would have sounded really good, you know, in a pitch room or something like that, where they were starting to kind of jot down some ideas of what this would be. And I do think that the show overall does dive into and tackle some of the plot holes that I think were definitely present from the previous films, specifically the first one with the passing of the mantle of Santa Claus from the previous Santa Claus to Tim Allen. So it was pretty cool to see them kind of dive into some of those things and get a little bit deeper into the lore of Santa Claus within this universe. But beyond that, honestly, week to week, I found majority of the episodes to just be kind of a chore to watch. The humor was humorless. It was overly goofy and cheesy. There was a bunch of modernized elements thrown into the dialogue that just didn't work for me. And at its core, the base premise here is that you have Santa Claus, played by Tim Allen, losing his magic, and he feels like maybe it's time to pass off the coat, pass off the beard and the big gut to kind of just live a normal life again. And so he chooses a guy played by Cal Penn named Simon. And Simon has a company called Everything Everywhere, and I believe that's what it's called, or Everywhere Always, or something like that. I don't even remember. And so he's this aspiring guy who has like a Amazon kind of thing using drones. You know, he wants to be able to get people things as fast as they can and be one of the top delivery companies of all time. And so when he gets the opportunity to be Santa Claus, he's absolutely ecstatic as he learns about how the elves work and how their transportation system works and how he will actually be able to make his dream a reality. The sad reality, though, is that he is the embodiment of corporate greed and definitely is leaning into the idea of things like Amazon and all these different online ordering things that we have in the world. That in this day and age, you can just get anything you want by just pressing something on your phone and it'll be at your doorstep later that day if you have something like Amazon Prime or whatever the case may be. So yeah, the show definitely has a heavy message leaning in that direction about the current state of the world and how maybe that's ruined Christmas. And they go heavy-handed on it. And over the course of the series, Kal Penn's character Simon is ruining Christmas because it's not handling it how Santa Claus should, trying to make Christmas every single day versus having it be a special season of giving at the end of the year that people can anticipate. And so then Tim Allen and his family have to kind of get themselves back together to come back to the North Pole and save the day and save Christmas. And that's pretty much what the show is all about. And I think on paper, I like the idea. I can totally see how, again, in the writing rooms and stuff like that, this was definitely something that could have been a fun show. But unfortunately, beyond that solid premise for me was just not really solid execution. Whether it was the performances that were definitely intentional, the bad writing, and some of the casting that just didn't work for me. Overall, this show for me was just cringy to watch at times. There are characters and moments of dialogue that you're just looking at the screen like, why? There are characters and connections between characters that you almost feel like the show wants you to feel more connected to, that just feels rushed, whether it be a romantic one, a friendship one, or just anything really. Most of this show just felt rushed and cringy and just strange and offbeat. Something about it was just so weird to me. The intro for this, the intro music that would play, it almost felt like a fever dream, like an acid trip. Yeah, you know, it's just really strange. I don't know what the hell they were thinking with this show, to be completely honest. I think that there was some potential here, as I mentioned. I was happy to see Tim Allen return. I was happy to see the cast return. There's a couple other cameos that appear here from the previous films that unfortunately are just relegated to being nothing but quick cameos. You know, there are characters that I think a lot of us would have liked to have seen from the previous films that could have made for a more interesting inclusion in the story here. But instead we focus on a bunch of new characters and specifically a bunch of elves, which that's where I kind of struggled the most, is that they cast a bunch of these kids as elves who are our main elves across the entire series, and most of them just did not work, with the one I have to mention the most being Devin Bright, who plays Noel, who's one elf who is completely loyal and in love with Santa Claus, specifically Scott Calvin, Tim Allen's Santa Claus. So when the new Santa Claus comes in, he is not about it at all. He is distressed, he is sad, and he's pretty rebellious towards this new Santa played by Kal Penn. At the center of it all, that's kind of the heart of the Christmas spirit, is the character played by Rupali Bread, the character of Grace, who is Simon, the new Santa Claus's daughter. And yeah, you know, I thought that she brought something, you know, cute and innocent about the Christmas spirit to the show. You know, eventually she realizes that her dad is the bad guy here and that he's ruining Christmas. But, you know, I just feel like everything was just so glossed over at times. In the end, even when they save the day, you know, it's not like he's really the bad guy. They don't really stop him in this, you know, he's the bad guy kind of way. Not in the same way that we saw with like Jack Frost or the fake Santa Claus in the second film. It just felt just kind of like, oh, yeah, we're here to save the day. And, oh, this guy's really not all that bad. He just wanted to try to do something that was not that great. And that's that. I just feel like the show could have done so much more, and ultimately, by the time it was over, I just found myself bored. I found myself thinking, I know there's a second season coming, and I think my nostalgia will definitely have me watch that second season. And what I'm hoping for is just a tighter-knit story, you know? I think that it's nice to see this returning cast, and you have these new characters in here like Santa and Mrs. Claus's two kids, Cal and Sandra. Cal being the one who has some of the abilities that his dad has, but he's just like a cringy character who's disconnected from teenage life, and he's in love with VR and drones, and he has adopted the abilities of his father to kind of see warp holes in the sky in order for him to maybe one day become Santa Claus himself. And then his daughter has the ability to speak to animals. And so over the course of the show, we see them kind of develop these abilities and realize that because they were born in the North Pole and Santa Claus is their dad, they did kind of take on some of these Santa Claus skills that will kind of lead to the title of the show, The Santa Clauses, where it's not just him being Santa Claus, because Santa Claus can't do it alone. He needs the help of everybody else. And so, again, I think there's stuff in here that works. Like if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, that sounds kind of cute, like I can see how that would be fun. It's one of those things where like I'm able to recognize that on paper a lot of this sounds interesting, but it's the execution, it's the dialogue, it's the performances, it's the music, it's the editing. Something about it just felt so weird and off. There was times where characters were interacting and they were speaking to one another, and the reactions to each other didn't even feel like they were acting off of each other. Like they took 2 or 3 different takes to bring that scene together. So it often didn't really feel like it flowed very well. There was something off about the pacing and the flow of the show more often than not. And even Tim Allen wasn't really my favorite part of this show. Matilda Lawler, who plays Betty, the head elf, the one who is kind of like, you know, the chief in command and the one that's always kind of talking to Santa Claus about what we can and can't do. She, without a doubt, was the best part and the best elf character in the show, and I thought that she gave the best performance, leaning into the over-the-top elf element of the character, but also having heart and charm and having real moments of emotion in her performance. And I found that when I was the most connected with anything happening emotionally, it was definitely because of Matilda Lawler playing Betty and that character overall, even though unfortunately her elf husband in this world is Noel, the annoying one I mentioned earlier, played by Devin Bright. So it's kind of like a win-lose. But anyway, guys, I don't know what more to say on this. I was definitely disappointed with this show. I don't think it's all that great. I also found that some of the special effects in here were definitely a lot lesser than a lot of other Disney Plus stuff. And having come off of Andor recently, I'm not necessarily expecting the Santa Clauses to get the same budget as Andor, but Andor was so heavy-handed with beautiful CGI as well as top-tier special effects on a practical level and set locations and all that kind of stuff. So to see something like that was epic on so many levels, and then go into the Santa Clauses that's just like got really noticeable green screen and bad CGI. Yeah, it just didn't work for me. And so I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Did you like this show? Did you not like this show? Did it bring you back to your childhood? Or do you also feel like it was a little bit cringy like me? Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.